Way of BJJ, this is Minju, and I'm here today with Mr. Tristan, Connelly, and we're at Pinnacle MMA Academy today, right? So how are you doing? How are you feeling today, Tristan?
I feel fantastic. I just finished my second to last hard sparring and feel great, ready to kick ass.
All right, nice. So as I was just telling Tristan, the interview that we like to do, we like to learn more about you as a person, because I know as a fighter you get asked about how your fight camp is going. How do you think you're gonna beat the next guy or whatever. And I'm sure all the answers are gonna be pretty similar. But
yeah. Well, I mean, we gotta say we're gonna win, right? I'm hoping to hit him a couple times before he takes me down. No, just kidding. Of course I'm gonna think I'm gonna kill him. So, easy question to answer.
Yeah, exactly. So let's not go down that route, because again, I'm more interested in learning about your story. How did you get into MMA? What was your first martial art?
I started off just doing some jiu-jitsu. I've always had a fascination with martial arts. From a very young age, it was Ninja Turtles, Power Rangers, but my parents always kind of were afraid to let me do it, thinking I'd get in fights or something. I don't know why, but anyway, they were worried, so it never happened. And when I was probably 19 years old, I walked past a jiu-jitsu club. I figured I'd try it, and I went in. One day I was hooked, and I was pretty good at not getting choked right away. I thought, this is awesome. Like, haven't done this before, and I was immediately doing it every day, like twice a day, every day. From there, it just led into trying some kickboxing. Loved that. From there, they're like, hey, do you want to try a pancration tournament? It's like, sure, I did that. Led me to my first MMA fight, and it just, it's a little cliche, but the rest is history,
Wow, you didn't waste any time, eh? No. So that is actually really interesting, because most people, they will say, hey, my first martial art was like karate or taekwondo, or in the U.S., especially wrestling, right? Yeah, so, but you started just right off the bat, BJJ.
BJJ,
yeah. So what made you want to choose BJJ like right away? I know you walked past the academy, but were there any other options that you were thinking about?
No, not really. I honestly had no idea what BJJ was when I was like jiu-jitsu. Like I was like whatever. It was just really a crime of opportunity. Like that was the gym that was there. I figured. I didn't know what the difference between striking and grappling arts were. I'd never watched the UFC. I watched the UFC for the first time with these guys that I grappled with, which actually ended up turning out to be a 10th Planet School initially. It was one of Eddie's first affiliates with 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu Victoria. And it was, it was right around Nabil was starting as well. That was kind of my first introduction was actually a Japanese jiu-jitsu base my instructor Ari had, but he really focused on Newaza, and he wanted to get more into Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and so that's when he reached out to Eddie, and we kind of went down that rabbit hole, and we just had the books, and we were going through just doing all the moves from mastering the rubber guard, mastering the twister. Like that's literally where we started.
Oh wow! So you just dated yourself. That was probably around 2010-ish.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, even before, because I mean. Yeah, it was probably 2007, 2008.
Yeah, we all had that book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man. So basically, jiu-jitsu. You're like, man, that sounds like something a Ninja Turtle would do.
Yeah. In fact, and when it was the first class I went to, and then we rolled, and I didn't know what I immediately was good at it. I was a small kid, always not very like physical. I was a skateboarder my whole life, so I was active, but. I was immediately tough. I immediately understood how to keep my chin tucked and grab hands and at least be a son of a bitch. I was working in bars and nightclubs at the time, and I would start wrestling with the doormans who would ragdoll me around, but then they would I can't get a hold of them. Like, what's going on? I had an affinity for being a pain in the ass, so I just took that and ran with it.
Oh, wow. Yes. Speaking of being tough, I mean, you don't have the nickname of Boondock unless you're tough, right? So how did you get that nickname?
It's kind of random, actually. My favorite movie as a teenager, my friends was the Boondock Saints, and that was before the streaming devices, so you had to have it at DVDs or or VHSs even. But we had, you know, that DVD. We'd get drunk and we'd watch Boondock Saints over and over again. So when it came to picking a walkout song, I was like, well, this is the movie that me and my friends watched, and we always loved the opening theme. So we're like, I'll just walk out to that. The promoter loved it, and he decided that's what was going to be my walkout song from then on out. So then after my first fight, I think my second fight was in Japan. I came back for my third fight. He didn't even ask me. I walked out to that, and he introduced me as Boondock. I had no idea what was going to happen, and then the next day on Sheer Dog, there it was, Tristan Boondock Connelly. So like, they always say the best nicknames are the ones you don't choose, right? People will try and like change their nicknames or pick something. It's not right? You gotta earn your nickname.
Right, that kind of fits in with the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu culture too, right? You know, you don't same thing. You don't get to pick your nickname.
No,
You're a tree trunk. There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, sir.
Dude, that is awesome. Yeah. So, you did say that your parents were afraid that you are gonna become violent or start beating people. So how do they feel about your MMA career then?
Oh, they're very supportive, and it was probably more my mom. She was just worried for, you know, typical mom stuff. I don't know if she was worried, if she's worried it's gonna hurt or get in fights, but she just she did think it was a good idea for whatever reason. Now she actually looks back and she thinks that she regrets it. She thinks she should have put me into it. She's like, I held you back from something you're good at. But she's like, it was out of my fear and not knowing and not understanding. So I'm sure they still don't like it all that much. But they also, they totally understand that I love it and it's my passion. And they're super supportive of whatever I do. And they're incredibly proud. I'm sure they're terrified every time I fight, but they wear it well. You know, they don't show it. They show that they're behind me 100%. And that, you know, there's no hesitation.
Right. Wow. Yeah. Nice. So what was it like growing up in Victoria?
It was great. Victoria, you know, it's a beautiful island. It was, after living in the city for a long time, it's definitely a good place for a kid growing up. You know, there's just enough trouble to get into, but not too much trouble. You know, like the real bad guys don't like the water for whatever reason. It's like South Park when, you know, they're trying the one tape and they're trying to get away from the fifth graders and they're like, quick, cross the water. Fifth graders hate water. Like they roll up like, oh, look at her chains wet. Like, let's go around, you know. All the gangs and the real violence, they're afraid of the water.
There you go. Yeah, very very astute observation there. Yeah, and it's probably a little less distraction from training too, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, it was. There, like as you get older, the downfall is there's not many avenues to go outside of construction or government jobs, or restaurant and bar work. So, as I was getting into my 20s, I was working in bars and restaurants. There's a lot of incentive to go out and drink and party, or just go train. So you have these two tides pulling you both different directions, and you know the training kind of. You caps out at a certain level, you know, like there's definitely people that are all in and training all the time, but there's just only so many of them. When we come over to the mainland, there's just more bodies, and it's the same with I go down to Vegas. It's just there's more like-minded people that are, you know, pursuing the same thing I'm pursuing. So that always really helps when you have other people that are trying to take you, are trying to be like, hey, do this, do that. It can be very distracting, and it's easy to get sucked and drawn into these other lifestyles. And if you really want to make a run at anything, especially at an international level, you have to be all in. You have to really, balance is important, but you have to keep away from the things that are taken away from your overall goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Really well said, especially for the young up-and-coming fighters, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So, because I know Jiu-Jitsu is your core first martial art, so I would say that's your base martial art, pretty much.
100%.
Yeah, and that was looking at your record, right? So you, out of the 14 wins, none of them were by submission. Yeah, so that's...
the most of them were by submission. Most of them are rear naked chokes.
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah. So what do you think of the state of Jiu-Jitsu right now in mixed martial arts?
It's definitely changed. It's not mixed martial arts. Trying to say that, you say I have a base. I do have a base in Jiu-Jitsu, and we have our base. But nowadays, everyone's got to be a complete martial artist. You got a complete mixed martial artist. No one thing is going to beat a guy that's just well balanced and everything. If you can be an amazing kickboxer, but if you don't have good wrestling, jiu-jitsu, boxing, you're going to fail. Same if any other categories are emphasized and the other are not. You're going to fail. So it's really about, at this day and age, it's about everyone's got good jiu-jitsu, everyone's got good wrestling, everyone's got good boxing, everyone's got good kickboxing. it's the in-between. It's how we're putting it all together. It's the, the adding in the traditional martial arts into the mix. They're like I always say they're like the expansion pack to the video game. I mean, Brood War is awesome, but you need StarCraft to make it run, right? Otherwise, it's just error loading, right? It doesn't work. So you really need, it's now about the expansion packs, the meshing together, the seamlessly knowing when to wrestle and go to jiu-jitsu. For example, for me, for this camp, I have a jiu-jitsu base. So like I'm too accepting, especially in tired and times of attrition, of accepting being on my back. And I've lost most of my losses are because of that in some way. So now it's like, no, I need to be a wrestler until I'm forced to be in jiu-jitsu, right? Like I can't accept, and it's wrestle, and then when wrestling is no longer a possibility, if you continue trying to wrestle, you're gonna fail. That's when we go to jiu-jitsu, and we do jiu-jitsu until there's an opportunity to begin wrestling, and then we start wrestling, and then go into our boxing with boxing and kickboxing, right? Like we want to be long and keep back with our kicks, but we got to be careful that we don't give them our hips. Then when we get inside, we don't want to keep that same kickboxer head up mentality, because the boxer will start and wrestler will start smashing us, right? So it's understanding how things change dynamically in ranges, in situations, and how long to push one thing before we switch to another. And that's those little details that make the big difference at the high level right now.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. So that's definitely a trend that we've been seeing in the past few years. So, but we all know that trends change, right? So where do you see the role of jiu-jitsu in mixed martial arts in the next, let's say, 10 years or so? So where do you see the role of jiu-jitsu in mixed martial arts in the next, let's say, 10 years or so?
10 years. It's going to be very, just sprinkling it in when you need it. Like it'll be, because jiu-jitsu tends to, because there's time limits in fighting. This is I believe, the big reason. If there was no time limits, you could do jiu-jitsu all day, because jiu-jitsu is great at not taking damage. And not using a lot of energy. So if you have to fight for 2 hours, jiu-jitsu is great. You just go to your back, you let the wrestler work, you shut him down, you don't take damage, you slip, you're there working and passing your guards, you're trying, and eventually you're gonna get tired, you're gonna catch him in something. But you only got 15 minutes. A good wrestler can wrestle you for 15 minutes, and it doesn't work anymore. So it has to be, you have to have that wrestler, because of that time limit, you gotta have that wrestler's mindset of you're gonna go with good technique, good position, but then all of a sudden when someone overtakes you, it's like immediately you're hitting jiu-jitsu, immediately you're going for that submission, that sweep, or whatever, off balancing, and maybe something there's, you take it. If it's not, they pull out, then immediately you're kicking away, getting back to your wrestling or your standing and going in there. So it really has to be, it's going to become more transitional, where it's like it's not the main thing anymore. The main thing is going to be a wrestling base with good boxing fundamentals for your head movements, good, you're staying safe, then you got a good base, and then again, the kicks and the knees are thrown in like the jiu-jitsu is thrown in, right? But the boxing and the wrestling are going to be okay, you can rest on those, you can take breaks in those situations because you're safe in those situations. You got a good base, you can't get taken down, and you got good defense, good head movement, and your hands are up so you can block kicks and everything. That's where you can rest. The kickboxing and the jiu-jitsu is going to be more the in-between, I feel.
Gotcha. Yeah, so of course, as a way of BJJ, we obviously don't, I mean, we feel like jiu-jitsu is super important, but we also understand that, in terms of having rule sets and time limits and everything, then obviously whatever you said was 100% true. So if you were to be given a chance to start over, like in a video game, to build a prototypical, like the perfect fighter, how would you have approached it differently?
Well, now, and this is what you're starting to see, is it's really not separating everything. I would make it, and you're seeing a lot of guys do this, is jiu-jitsu and wrestling is the same thing. We're not wrestling for a pin, and we're not wrestling or not doing jiu-jitsu for a submission. We are grappling for top position, but we are looking to take high percent of choke, and I believe chokes are the future. Head and arm chokes, darces, anacondas. Rear naked chokes are hard to get on guys nowadays, unless you've beaten them up and taken them. these are these positions where you can end up, like, if you don't get them, you can come back out on top very easily. They're good control positions, and they're very safe. These sort of things where you're always attacking the neck and attacking the neck, right? Like, guys in a fight, they'll let their arm pop, they'll let their knee pop, they'll let that happen and they'll keep going, right? You have to like really dismantle at a high level a joint, or have them be like terrified you were going to shred it to pieces to get them to stop. But if they're unconscious, right? Doesn't matter. So having that strong wrestler's mentality, as far as a grappling aspect, just that strong, always be on top. But you want to be putting your back in bad positions where you're comfortable, but like the incentive is always to create room or space to get back up and either get back to your feet or sweep them and get on top. Or if they're ignoring it, then you can take a submission. But like, it's more having it as a grappling and then you're striking, and separating into those two categories. Rather than boxing, Muay Thai, karate. It's like, take the best of all those things and make one style, and then what your grappling style, your jiu-jitsu, your wrestling, everything all together, and your judo, everything all into one style, and then merge those two. It helps as humans to segregate things. That's why we do it, right? Like, it helps us to understand when we can organize things into different things. So that's an important thing, and just to come in and try and learn MMA all in one, it's overwhelming. But to really just, you got your grappling, you got your striking. Let's try and like make those two things really strong for MMA, and then just merge those together. And then rather than having to pick, right now what we're trying to do is say, okay, what's good from the boxing? What should we leave from the boxing for MMA? What's good from the kickboxing? What should we leave from the kickboxing or Muay Thai, right? Like, because there's stuff from every individual art that will not work in MMA, right? But because of the way the rule sets are laid out in individual sports, you can abuse situations that you start getting used to that too much. We need to just eliminate those things that are useless in MMA for MMA fighters, because that's what's going to take them to the next level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really well said, man. Really well said. Yeah, because I think the trend, even 10 years ago, people were saying like, hey, the next generation of fighters are going to be like starting with MMA, and then that's it. But you're saying, which makes sense, that we still want to be able to see, okay, you know, this technique is from judo, this technique is from this. In our brain, we still need to compartmentalize that, right?
Yeah, still need to compartmentalize everything, and then figure out a style that, instead of like, it doesn't need to be called judo per se, like now we're at the point where we're taking the things out. That's kind of the place we're at. We're really starting to figure out what's working and what's not, and how to mesh it together. Now, this is already happening. People are starting to organize into these, like, okay, this is your MMA grappling and this is your MMA striking. Like, forget calling all these different things. It's like, just don't even ever learn the bad stuff from boxing. Don't ever learn the bad stuff. That's like, unless you want to be a kickboxer, unless you want to be a boxer. When you go into those sports, of course, you're going to learn the things that help you abuse that rule set. Mm-hmm. But really learning how to abuse the rule set of MMA, right? And GSP is one of the first guys that did that. And it's actually, I would say, changed because of how he fought. He learned that, look, I can just not get hit, jab, 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 jab. When they put pressure too much, just take him down and hold him down, right? And not that you can't still do that, but now they're changing, okay, this isn't a wrestling match. We can't judge it as a wrestling match. So damage is, like, we can only judge it as wrestling if damage is equal. If damage is equal, okay, then we have to go to who is controlling, right? But if you're wrestling a guy, taking him down, he's elbowing, you, and he hits you 5 times, and you take him down, and he's elbowing, he gets back, like, well, that guy wins. He damaged you more. Just because you took him down 10 times, that doesn't mean you won the fight. The fight is who can damage the other person, right? We're, in the end of the day, we want to know, if this went forever, who would die, right? That's really the only question that we have to answer. And if you've created more damage, well, then that's going to add up over time. You got to, okay, well, if we times that by 1,000, the person that got taken down 100 times has no damage, but the other guy's been hit now that many more times than he has, he's probably more hurt or closer to death at the end of it. That's the way I look at it, at least.
Yeah, we have to tell those to the judges, man. Yeah. We see some really atrocious judging there.
Yeah, it's all over the place right now. And that's partially because things are changing. Some people are still judging in the old ways. Some people are being told to judge this new way. So you don't know what you're going to get. As a fighter, you're like, I don't know the judges, like, what,
just try to
what
finish.
Are they looking at? And so all you can do is try and try and win in every aspect, cause damage and control, right? Like that's what you want to do and look for the finish. But it's, you know, it's a new sport. This is kind of part of it. You know, you look at boxing, wrestling, there's not a lot of big changes in the last 50 years. There obviously has been some. There's been lots of changes to athletics, like learning more about the better ways to train athletes, and nutrition and you know, training protocols, recovery protocols, and also treatments and surgeries to help athletes continue to compete. So those things have all gotten better, but the general like technique of boxing and wrestling, there hasn't been giant leaps and bounds at all in a long time. MMA every like 3 years it looks like a totally different sport, and it's gonna slow down. But like probably for the next 10 years, we're gonna go through this real blending stage where it becomes its own thing. Because it's kind of in that, like 5 years ago, I'd say it was still very much separate, like every practicing separate. It's getting more and more to like it's its own sport, and eventually in 50 years it probably the evolution will slow down big time.
Gotcha. Yeah, so speaking of MMA, we all know MMA is a very, very tough and unforgiving business, right? So what motivates you to keep going?
It's what I love to do. I never thought, when I first started doing jiu-jitsu and the club was like, oh, we're gonna watch the UFC. I was like, oh, okay, I'll go watch. I'm like, I would never do this. Like, this is crazy. 5 years later, I'm like, fuck, I'll do that. You know, why not? And it's fun. I love it. Nothing makes me happier than doing this. You know, like I've had 2 neck surgeries, and people are like, well, why'd you get neck surgery? Why don't you just quit fighting? It's like, because it's not just fighting, it's training. It's what I love to do. My quality of life would have diminished horribly if I hadn't been able to continue doing what I'm doing. So, you know, there's not many things that humans were built to do, but fighting was one of them. You know, it's deep in our evolution, and I believe it's something that everyone should learn how to do to a point, right? Like, it builds confidence, it builds fitness, it builds understanding of where we are in this world.
Yeah, for sure. Everybody needs to learn how to fight, you know, or at least know what to expect if a real conflict happens,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So if fighting doesn't exist at all, what do you think it would be doing?
I have no idea, honestly. Like, I'd probably be in construction somewhere. The thought of sitting in a desk job all day, 9 to 5, makes me sick to my stomach. I couldn't do it. I need to be doing stuff. I need to be moving. So the most likely thing, I would have gone into some sort of trade. I don't think I would have had success. Like, even though I'm good, I'm smart and good at learning things, in a school setting, it's too boring for me, you know? Like, just thinking about I don't think I would have found something that I would have wanted to go to school for that would have motivated me to try hard enough. But I think now that after going through this, when I do retire from fighting, I would have a better chance of going to school and learning, because I would have a better idea of knowing. I'd know what I was doing for something. Like, early on, I was just like, I going to school, be like, I don't really know if I want this. Like, it's boring. I don't know where it's gonna end. But now, having this life experience of fighting and going into a career, it would be like, okay, well, I could pick something else I want to do, and I would be motivated to go to school and learn to do what that is. But like I said, if I didn't have fighting, I don't know what, I'd probably just have some construction job that I probably didn't like, and I'd probably be, you know, bitter, resentful person.
Gotcha. Yeah. So again, there's nothing wrong with just holding down a regular job. A lot of people do it,
yeah,
but you definitely wouldn't be as fulfilled, right?
No, definitely not. And like a lot of people love their jobs, and I know people that are carpenters, and they love it, right? They're like, this is great. And I think that type of, I would have probably found enjoyment doing that kind of thing. But, you know, it just, you know, it wouldn't have probably been as fulfilling as doing this.
Exactly. Yeah, so speaking of the neck injury, because I know this really showed how important MMA is to you, because you could have been like, use that as an excuse to say, hey, you know what, that's it, my fighting career is over, I'm going to go do something else, right? So, but has that ever crossed your mind?
No, it's always been a thought that, oh, well, hopefully this doesn't end my career, but the only way it was going to end it is if I was told the doctors would just be like, you're not fighting, no one's going to clear you, right? Like, you talk to some doctors and they'll be like, oh, you're going to be done, you're never going to fight again. But then you talk to fighters or doctors within your industry, and like, they're the ones that are in charge of saying whether you can fight or not. And they're like, no, you can fight. And I'm like, okay, great, I'm going to fight, no problem. So until they say I can't fight, I'm fighting.
Nice, nice. So it's almost like right now you have a new lease on your career, really. So where do you see yourself going in the next 5 years? What's your goal right now?
So I feel great right now. Like that, I'm hoping all my medical problems are done. And in the past, it's a rough sport. I'm sure things might come up, but I got another good 5 years left, I think, 4 or 5 years at least at the top level. So I'm going to keep going for as long as I can. 40 is kind of a number where I think that I probably will have to take a step back from competing at the highest level, but from there it'll still be within the industry. Like, I mean, I'll always have coaching. I'll keep competing in jiu-jitsu. Like, I look forward to doing masters tournaments when I'm older. I don't foresee martial arts ever and competing ever really going away. I'm going to do that as long as I can. And then who knows what else, like, depending on how the next 4 or 5 years go, there's going to be a whole bunch of potential other avenues within the MMA industry that I can get into. And I don't know what all those look like right now, but I'll be keeping the door open for whatever comes along.
Nice, very nice, man. Yeah, so here's a fun little question for you. So what is a hidden talent outside of fighting that nobody knows about?
Oh, hidden talent. I'm great at paraphrasing stuff and making it sound like I know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm really good at it. So I can if I know a little bit about something, I'm really good at making it appear as though I know a lot.
That's what this whole interview has been. No, I'm kidding. Dude, that's awesome. So let's talk about jiu-jitsu again, because again, this way of BJJ. So how would you describe your way of BJJ?
My way, I've always had a fairly physical style BJJ. I mean, technique is obviously super important, but I've always tried to outwork people. That's something I've always prided myself on. I've always had really good cardio and conditioning, and sort of my mindset with any kind of fighting art is to find what your strengths are and fight the way that makes sense to you. Anyone that says like, oh no, you're using too much muscle, or you're doing too, like, muscle is a technique. If you got it, like, why wouldn't you use it? But somebody are really strong, but they get tired really easily. So if they're like just coming out being strong 100%, well, that's not a good way for them to do it, because they're gonna get tired. So you want to find a way to use your attributes to your own best interest. And for me, I've always been able to just keep going. So I just like to just set a pace that's really high, have incredibly good defense on everything. That's why I've always felt my defense is very good. And that way I'm confident to just go forward and keep going. Because if our defense sucks, it's hard to just push forward and keep going, because we keep getting caught. But as long as you're like, okay, I'm aware my defense is really good, I'm just gonna keep going. The other person usually mentally break. They go, at some point in their brain, they sigh and they slow down, and that's where you take over. So that's how I like to fight in general, is I like to keep constant pressure, have really good defense, and just wear my opponents out and break them.
Nice. Yeah, that's probably the best way to defeat somebody, not just physically, but mentally and spiritually as
that's
well.
How you gotta do.
Complete annihilation.
Take from them everything, right?
Give them nothing.
That's right. You know it.
Awesome. And then I know you're also a coach, right? You teach jiu-jitsu and everything. So what frustrates you the most when it comes to like teaching a group class? Because I'm gonna give you some more details, right? So so because you know how in a group class people come and go, right? You have people who's more experienced, less experienced, more talented, less talented. What frustrates you?
So that's really tough. It's hard to create game plans when you have so many people at so many different levels, right? That's a tough thing to deal with as a coach, and people coming and going. You feel like you just get started and they take off. So it's nice to just have a small group of guys that's really committed. But at the same time, that's generally, if that's the way you're paying the bills, it's kind of hard to do. So, what I find really frustrating, sort of not looking at other people within myself, is how do I have to teach? Because everyone understands things differently, and when you try and teach people how you understand it, sometimes it just misses, right? And it's like, hey, So how I look at it as my fault. Like, how do I explain this that is going to help you mentally understand it? What are the cues? Because a really easy example is if you're throwing a roundhouse kick and trying to get people to pivot on the foot. You just tell them, hey, pivot on the foot, but that mental cue doesn't get it. And then sometimes people say, okay, hey, turn your knee out, and that gets it. Other people don't get it. Sometimes it's open your hip. But it's like, well, really all these things, you can't do any of them without doing all of them, right? So it's like when you say turn over your kick, it means all these things have to happen, but sometimes it just takes one of those cues for the person to figure it out. So when you're trying to teach something, you teach them the cues that help you figure it out. It doesn't necessarily help them figure it out. So it's like, okay, how do I need to understand all the cues, and that way I can and see what, because sometimes they're trying to do what you're saying, but they're leaving everything else behind, and you're like, oh, I don't know why it's not happening. So just trying to figure out how to communicate what you need to communicate to make them figure it out, because teaching is not about showing as much as making them understand it on their own. And it's that bridge that I find annoying and difficult to sort of get over, and like that's what makes teaching challenging.
Yeah. So have you found any solution that has kind of worked?
Yeah, being consistent. You know, I like anything in life, the more you do it, the better you get at it, the more options. The more you fail, the more you start to learn how to overcome it. So it's just keep going. I like to keep teaching a little bit even when I'm in camp, because it also helps reinforce. People ask questions that you're like, hey, oh, yeah, like what do I do there? And then it's like maybe sometimes you're doing stuff that you totally take for granted that you're not even aware of. I always use the analogy of, you think you know how to walk? Like, okay, what muscle groups fire when you have to drive your one leg down and the other leg up? How do you keep balance? You have no idea how to fucking walk. Your brain does all that shit for you, automatic, right? Yeah, you understand that leg lifts up and the other one goes down. It's like, but you don't really know how to do things. Your brain knows how to do things. So that's just like in here. I'm teaching you something with my few cues that help me figure it out, but most of this is just happening, and my brain is firing off these simple cues, and then it's going from there. So teaching helps you understand the full movement gives you a better outlook, is that seeing that other people aren't getting it, then you have to look at the bigger picture and come back. So it really is, teaching is just as much of a part as training your own, as it's helping reinforce the good things, and also telling you this, oh, you're doing this wrong. Like sometimes, so many times I've been teaching people I'm doing something, and they're like, well, why are you doing this? Why do you do this? And you're like, because, wait, you know what? You're right. Let's not do that anymore. Forget what I just did. Do what this total white belt just did. It makes way more sense, you know? Like, that happens a lot, way more often than you think. And then that becomes like a mainstay, and then I'm teaching this thing some white belt, like, made up like 2 weeks ago. I'm like, I've been doing it forever.
Dude, that's awesome. That's awesome. So, so we're going to start wrapping the interview up, taking up a lot of your time, and appreciate it. I think that was a fun conversation for both of us. Thank you, Tristan, and best of luck on all your future endeavors, personal, MMA, business, everything, right? We are all really happy to see you successful, and that's awesome. It. Thank you so much.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you.
Way of BJJ.